I'm excited today to be talking with Jonathan Parfrey. Jonathan is a longtime advocate of the environment. He was the former director of Green LA Coalition. He's one of the founders at CicLAvia. He's one of the founders at Climate Resolve, and he's been super active in the environmental space for many years. We're going to be talking with Jonathan today about the intersection of COVID-19 and the environment. We're going to be talking about how to potentially fight a global problem like climate change with local action. And we're going to be diving in on many different fronts when it comes to the environment. He's an expert in the field, and this is going to be an amazing interview. So check it out. So Jonathan, great to see you. Thanks for talking with me today.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks.
For anyone who doesn't know, can you talk a bit about your past and how you came to where you are now and some of the highlights?
Well, I'm an old guy, Aaron, so that could take a very long time. But the thumbnail sketch is that born in New York City. My father was an actor. He moved out from the Broadway stage, and television production was mainly in New York in the 50s and into the early 60s. And so at that point, he came out to LA. I grew up in the West Side, went to Santa Monica High School, class of 76. Went off to school at Berkeley, read a lot about Mahatma Gandhi, wanted to live in a communal life, wanted my life to be more meaningful. So even though I was a Malibu kid, when I had my choice, me and my then young wife moved to Boyle Heights in East LA, where I joined a commune that served the poor. It was a 24/7 experience for the next 12 years of my life. Very beautiful, informative period. And I served the homeless and did political activism at that time. Upon leaving that, pretty shortly thereafter, I became the director of something called Physicians for Social Responsibility. And I served as the director there for 13 years. And then had an opportunity to lead all the environmental groups in LA in a coalition called the Green LA Coalition, and I directed that for 5 years. During that period, I became a commissioner at the LA Department of Water and Power, played a role in a big transition from fossil fuel to greening that utility. But I also felt that there was a huge opportunity to do some great work on climate change. And so with a grant from the Durfee Foundation, which is a great LA-based group, I got the opportunity to do in-depth research through this fellowship to study how to make the LA area even more committed to climate action. And the year that started was around 2009. And so in around 2010, I started this organization called Climate Resolve. And Climate Resolve is a LA-based group recognizing that climate change is this big global international problem. However, as Bob Dylan once observed, time may be an ocean, but it ends at the shore. And climate change may be global, but it ends right here in Los Angeles where we live. And our goal is to make climate change relevant and meaningful in people's lives so that they see that there's actions they can take, that they candidly must take to aid in their own personal and resilience and the resilience of their family. But even more than that, will contribute to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that we all contribute towards, that is making the climate problem much worse.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting part for me is that, you think of climate change and it feels so global, it feels bigger than ourselves, and you feel like you can't really make a dent. So I love the fact that taking a local approach to solve a global problem, especially in LA, I think we're unique, which you and I have spoke about before. We have the ports, we have, we could make a bigger impact here. But how are you seeing that take place in LA? And then how is that also a blueprint that other cities and communities can kind of follow?
I gotta say, if LA weren't LA, and forgive me, Wichita, Kansas, but I'm gonna pick on you for a second, but if we were Wichita, I don't think people wake up going, what the fuck is Wichita doing? How can we emulate Wichita? But that does happen with LA. Across the globe, people are watching the movies that are produced here. They're listening to the music that gets created here. They're driving the cars designed in the South Bay. They're watching the TV shows that get cranked out of here. They're wearing the clothes that get designed in LA. We have this outsized ability to influence the culture in the rest of the globe. And what we also know is that LA isn't your classic, densely populated locality where we have suburbs, we have a lot of sprawl. And the countries with major cities in the developing world, whether it's Africa or Asia, they're looking at the way Los Angeles is, this sprawly, dense, but not confined dense, but sprawly dense kind of city. They're going like, oh, if those guys can crack the code on climate change, if those guys in Los Angeles can show a way forward on dealing with the impacts of climate change, that could be a real revelation for us. And those are lessons we can take in the developing world. And so I think in LA, we have this incredible influence, either through culture or through example, to help other parts of the globe where, people hear if San Francisco's doing something, they kind of smirk and they go, love San Francisco, but it's like a boutique city. I've heard the phrase. Or, New York does something. I love New York, but it's such a unique, densely populated place that it's already in its league unto itself, and other cities can't relate to it. But when LA does something, it is something other cities pay close attention to. So for that reason, when it comes to looking at climate change, we try to bring the global data down to a neighborhood scale. So working with scientists either at UCLA, or USC, or at Jet Propulsion Lab, or at UC San Diego at the Scripps Institution, they've done some amazing work on something called downscales, where you take these global climate models and you keep in the topographical distinctions of the area, but you keep looking at closer and closer scales. And that form of computation, which is called dynamical downscaling, takes literally trillions of calculations to figure out how to handle these incredible global climate models down to these very small areas. But that work has been done mainly by UCLA, and we're really privileged to be able to work with those researchers. That they have showed us how Los Angeles, almost like neighborhood by neighborhood, is going to be impacted, and impacted differently. So, for example, in downtown Los Angeles, we do have some influence from the ocean. So currently, I think we only have, I wish I had these numbers right in front of me. We only have, I think, about 5 or 6 days of temperatures that exceed 95 degrees over the course of the year. But looking out to the mid-century, that number is going to quadruple, around 20 days of extreme heat temperatures going out into the mid-century, in the 2040 to 2060 epoch. And so those like 25 days is very different than what will be experienced in just a few miles away in East LA, or even beyond that, a few miles away into the San Gabriel Valley, or a few miles into the San Fernando Valley. Those areas will see literally 2 or 3 months worth of days exceeding 95 degree temperatures. Wow. So you find that out through those downscales, where you can understand these impacts that are going to be experienced where people live. And when you do that kind of work, you realize it's not just polar bears, it's not South Sea Islanders, not the people of Bangladesh. And my God, they are definitely in the eye of the bullseye. But so are we. And we need to recognize that as well.
So, first of all, it's fascinating. That, to me, paints one piece of the picture. In CommonAlly, we have a younger demographic. What does it look like with taking that data that is now on a micro scale, macro scale, and turning that into action and wrapping that around everyday life? Like, how do you take a college freshman and make them interested in the data you just described? Like, how does that get into their brains that, oh my God, I'm personally affected, and then activate them in a way that can actually do something to help?
Well, the first lesson in organizing is that you got to give people a sense that their actions will actually yield a positive outcome. Mm-hmm. Lesson number one, because why do anything unless you feel like you're going to be successful in accomplishing whatever goal it is? So if you feel you're absolutely tilting against windmills and you will never succeed, it's in the human condition that we don't even try in the first place. We just go, just not going to pay attention to that. It's just not important to me.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would do is tell people, and we lead with a lot of our presentations with this, is that there are things that we can do today that will make a difference. You have to put in a little bit of hope so people feel that their energies will be sufficient to affect some change. And that's really important to us. So, and I don't want to sugarcoat things. There are things that we can do that will cool down our city. And so we at Climate Resolve have been one of the chief organizers on trying to promulgate cool roofs and cool streets. And the reason we do that is because it gives us something tangible that we can do today that will make a difference in cooling down our city. We also promote expanding the urban tree canopy as well. So it's not just this engineered solution of cool roofs and cool streets, but we need to be on the side of nature to affect these better outcomes. So we push for those things, and those things will work. We recently worked on a study with a group, Tree People, and I don't know if you're familiar with them. Mm-hmm. They're a great organization. We work hand in glove with them on so many things. And in this research study that involved UCLA and University of Miami, Cal State Northridge, and others, Arizona State, other institutions, one of the things that we really came up with was that if we institute reflective surfaces, the roofs and the streets, along with an enhanced tree canopy, we can actually stave off the effects of the heat from climate change in Los Angeles for the next 30, 40 years.
Wow.
Now, if we keep emitting the greenhouse gas emissions, all of those effects get washed away. So we have, the first lesson of when you're in a hole, you stop digging, right? So we have to stop digging the hole. But there are things that we can do that can prevent a lot of illness and injury and death due to extreme heat. We can affect those things here in Los Angeles and help people today. So there is hope. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, there's some really good news because we're in California. We're doing some really good things. So Senate Bill 100 by incoming councilman Kevin De Leon, when he was in the California legislature, he had this bill that says that by the year 2045, California will have 100% of its electricity from renewable sources. Oh. So entirely green by 2045. The good news is we're getting there even quicker than 2045. So Southern California Edison is going to be at over 80% green energy, carbon-based emissions by the year 2030. Within the next 10 years, over 80% of our electricity is coming from that. It's exciting. We're like moving on that. And so the more we get off of vehicles and we electrify them, or we learn how to get by on public transit or from bicycles, all of those things. And I ride my bike. I think it's a real thing. And maybe some of your listeners, I don't know if they know this, but the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions is from the transportation sector. It's from cars.
Is that more so than housing as well? Because housing contributes too, right? And construction and building.
Oh yeah, housing is just like, I think it's 12%, while transportation is now over 50% in the state of California.
Wow.
So it's the big elephant in the room. And when it comes to electricity, it's going to zero. But when it comes to transportation, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah,
isn't it fascinating? During this COVID period, you look outside and it's incredibly beautiful. And why can't we have economic vitality and blue skies at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think figuring out the economic piece of that is really what I think that's the nut to crack. And I'm glad you brought that up because, I'm riding my bike more than ever now. And, whenever we do have to go out, I feel like we're in small town America in LA. And whether we go into intermittent quarantines in the future or whatever that looks like, I could be wrong, but I feel like Mother Nature is kind of taking a breath and making a small comeback. Like I'm seeing cleaner air, like I'm seeing wildlife, I'm seeing green hillsides, like, and it also, there's something about consumption that, because we can't, I think it's let everybody really figure out how we were living before. And maybe that's a pipe dream and maybe everyone's just yearning to get back to being crazy again. But are there positive changes that have come from us not being out so much? And can we sustain that after this passes?
Well, the reality is that I think 98% of the people who are in lockdown right now, that's all of us, would give anything to things to appear like normal again and to regain some economic stability. So the big fight that is taking place literally right now in Washington and elsewhere is how do we revive the economy without going back to the old-fashioned fossil fuel industries again? Does it make sense for us to dig up more coal or dig up more oil now? There's a glut of oil, but does it make sense to do those things in the face of the big climate threat that we're facing? And is there a way of emerging from this with greater knowledge of how to have a more human scale, livable city, a livable society? And when it's more livable, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing for the climate. It's a good thing for the people living here. And maybe this period will allow us to readjust our sense of personal priorities. I just don't want to see us rush back into the polluted skies of LA.
Yeah.
And that we're just going to have this funny thing. Oh, do you remember in 2020 when, we were all in lockdown and how clean the air was? Ha ha ha. I wish we learned from this rather than it being some kind of vain memory.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I really, really hope for the same thing. And I feel like this was a trial run in a way where, I think climate change leads to displacement and migrations, and a lot of time unwanted migration, which then stresses other parts of the planet. And it's a domino effect. To me, you're getting a small taste of that. And this has been in phases. I don't know, what you've seen of this, but even in New York, where a lot of New Yorkers went up to upstate New York or went into Connecticut and, started leaving the city for less dense populated areas. And then those areas were affected and couldn't really handle the influx, and the healthcare system couldn't handle it. And that created a strife within communities. It's fascinating to me because I feel like with climate change, that is, exponentially bigger but it's kind of the same thing. And now we're seeing how people are dealing with that. And I feel like it might help people who are looking out for that and trying to create policy that mitigate that a little bit, that now they got a taste of it. Do you feel that, or am I just in my crazy world? And it could be
I
both.
don't I don't think you're crazy. I think you have very good aspirations, and it makes sense that we would look for policies where we have a more livable, sustainable world and in the future, and that we take some lessons from the current moment. That makes sense. I know that there are places that are rethinking how they have their sidewalks, and how they're thinking of widening sidewalks. And that means taking away lanes on the street. It means taking away, parking spaces. I kind of like that personally.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in Europe a few times, and I've noticed that there is a very nice quality of life that people jealously guard, and it makes sense to them to pay for places like bookstores and newsstands. That's part of a policy in France, that they actually have bookstores and newsstands.
Yep.
Because it's a place where a community gets to feel like a community. And Milan, I just read this morning, is going to be taking this downtime during the COVID crisis to spend money to fix its streets and actually widen them, widen the sidewalks, so that there could be more bicycling and more pedestrian use. It's funny though, you take a place like 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. It used to be 3rd Street. When I was a little kid, I remember when it was a real street. I remember when they closed that thing up, and they called it the promenade, and it became one of the most popular places because it became a place where people can just walk around and enjoy each other's company.
Yep.
It's something. And CicLAvia, when we first started that, we didn't know how people would respond. And then the very first event had somewhere around 100,000 people. It really told us that there's this pent-up, latent demand for people being able to be around people. And I think that's a good thing.
I do too. Yeah, I really do. And I think we're seeing that now too, now that we can't have that connection and that we can't be, congregating in places like that, where you see us seek it out more. I think we took for granted, you don't call your friends as much, you don't, get together as much. And now I feel like everyone's like, can we get on a Zoom happy hour like every day, and I haven't talked to them in a year or something. So I do think that there is that yearning, and I don't think that is a niche thing. I think that is just humanity as a whole, like, craves that. I think we thrive off that. So I think you're right on that. I know we're buttoning up on time a little bit, but I do want to talk about, the solutions to the climate crisis. And I'd also like to wrap that, obviously you're dealing with things in a very localized manner in LA. And I think we are the leader in a lot of ways when it comes to fighting climate change. But I also can see how that's off-putting to someone in Ohio or Missouri or Kansas or wherever, where they don't have that same connection. How do we motivate people who aren't in LA, and who aren't maybe seeing the progressive ends of fighting climate change? And how do we motivate young people? I know you've talked about some of the solutions and how to work locally, but do you have a few specific kind of pieces of advice for people who aren't here?
Yeah. First of all, California isn't an island. We operate in a global economy, and because of that, there's a lot of interest in what California does and what it doesn't do. And so Governor Jerry Brown, past governor, organized these global climate summits. And I was able to participate in them. And also he participated in the meetings of the United Nations climate conferences. Those functions were there because, and whenever Californians showed up, people were really interested in talking to the Californians. because people were paying attention to what comes out of California because of the influence of not just the entertainment industry, but sort of viewed as one of the cutting edge places on the planet that determines how culture will evolve over the next few years. People turn to us, they look to us. So I got a strong sense that that is a real thing. Because California operates in this global economy, I don't think people are looking to us and going, oh, they're doing the right thing, I want to follow and do the right thing. I think they do it because it's FOMO. If they don't do it, they're not going to be part of the globe's next economic activity. Think about Silicon Valley. Can the rest of the world really ignore what is coming out of California in terms of technology? They just can't. They can't afford it. And the same is true of other states. So it's my view that Ohio and Kentucky and South Carolina and Florida, they're going to come around not because, ooh, California inspired me to do the right thing. I don't think they operate in that game whatsoever. They don't get inspired. They get pressured. And I think they're going to follow what we do because they don't want to be left behind. And they will be left behind of the nations that recognize that are dealing with the reality of climate change. They have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. They have no choice, and so they're going to adopt these new technologies. And with California being a leader in renewable energy production, a leader in electric transportation, and a leader, and I think, in thinking about resilience, especially related to sea level rise and wildfires, drought, we have experience in these areas. People will turn to us throughout other parts of the states, throughout the globe, and say, California, what lessons do you have? We need to learn from you because this is going to be part of the global economy going forward. So I'm a little bit of an optimist, believe it or not, Aaron. I actually am. I actually think that it's market forces, forgive me, market forces will force these regressive places to own up and recognize that they have to change.
No, I agree. And I want to clarify too, like, I'm not trying to point to people in those places as, you know, not responsible or responsive to this. It's more of, I feel like the policies that are put in place are a little more way heavier in those areas than they do here. And I think our policymakers, at least in California, are primarily in step with the constituents. And I don't know that that's true elsewhere. So I think it's not just like people on the ground, but I think the forces are already fighting against them as well. But I agree with you. I think that the FOMO element is real. I think that people, you know, generally just want to live the best life they possibly can. And if there's a way to clearly communicate that, because I think messaging is another part of this where it's not always articulated that, you know, the economy can actually roar in a green future. And, you know, I don't know that that's been messaged in the right way yet across the board. I think people are definitely doing that. I think you guys are doing that really well. But I don't think uniformly that's happened yet, at least for our demographic. So I think there's a lot of positives as well. And I believe that I'm an optimist too, to some extent. But I'm just trying to find those pieces of hope so we could help people come on board no matter where they are.
Yeah, it's not inevitable. We have good laws, but those laws could be overturned. So just in today's paper, you have the Attorney General of the United States saying that he could bring legal action against governors that don't open up their economies during the COVID crisis. So the Attorney General is threatening implicitly, you know, Governor Newsom if he doesn't, you know, open up the bars and the gyms and the restaurants when President Trump wants them open. And so at the end of the day, you need to elect good people. And you need to keep up the pressure once they get elected. Because even when good people are in government, they need an outside force to not just hold them accountable, but more to be some political cover, because there's always going to be a kind of a, for want of a better term, a kind of a counter revolution. There's always going to be people who go, yeah, I kind of like the way things are. I'm used to getting in my car. I want my big ass SUV. I want my Cadillac. And I want to drive into a parking spot in front of a store. I want to walk into the store and get my stuff and then get in my car and then go somewhere. I grew up with that dream. I am very familiar with that middle class vision of American life. I get it. But the world can't afford that anymore. That shouldn't be our reality. And if that isn't our reality, are there ways for us to walk to a market or bicycle to a market or take our electric vehicle to a market? I mean, we don't have to go back to the old script that was written in the 1950s and live it out in the year 2020. But there are some people who will want to use that script. So even when you get good stuff done, there will be people who will come behind it and say, no, I want to go backwards. Yeah. So it's eternal vigilance, but it's also an optimism that if people get the idea that walking and getting to know your neighbors, whether it's in Santa Monica or downtown or any part of the country, you get to know people, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's really well put. I think you're 100% right. And, you know, I grew up with that same dream. And I think that generation after generation, it's retold. You know, I think the track houses of the 50s, I think, you know, GM built in LA with the roadways. I think that keeps happening. Like that same story is like retold in different ways, but we all keep almost like looking to that American dream in very similar light. And I think that has to change. I think we have to see a different future that still gives us something to like really get excited about in the future that is a little bit better for us. So hopefully that comes along. Real quick, I think we got a few minutes left here. I know we've touched upon this a little bit, but I'd like to talk about the intersection between COVID-19 and climate change, and where do you see that happening?
I'm very persuaded by the argument that when it comes to wild animals and human interaction, we have not been doing a very good job of that. And so the various pandemics that we have seen, or epidemics we've seen in the past, have all come from that origin of an interaction of where a flu to a bat is a deadly disease to a human being. And that transference from an animal to human beings can be very, very dangerous. So if human beings had a more intentional approach to biodiversity, of letting wild places be wild places, it's probably not a good idea to eat wild animals too. That might be another plus. But just that general respect, I'm very persuaded that we haven't been doing a very good job of that. Whether it's in Africa, where transference of a virus from chimpanzees to humans was responsible for the Ebola breakout, or it's the more recent one that from the COVID-19 that apparently came from bats, perhaps even through another animal that was a kind of an intermediary between the two. We have to have a more respectful relationship and ensure that biodiversity. Another big, I think, connection is believing scientists. So with the health scientists, they said we better stay inside or else we'll see many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths related to COVID-19. And so we listened to them. We stayed inside, and we've driven those fatality numbers down really low. And I hope we can listen to the same scientists that are telling us about climate change. Like, if we don't reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we have, then we're going to see a lot more mortality and morbidity in the globe. And we should listen to our scientists. I think another lesson is they tell you, act now, do it early. Early is good, because if you wait, there will be a lot more impacts. And so I think that's another lesson that is true for both COVID and for climate change. Last one is on the subject of resilience. I was just talking to a climate scientist who works for the USGS, and she was telling me that they were studying cascading climate impacts. So like a drought makes the soil very hard, then comes a wildfire that makes the soil even harder, and then comes a huge atmospheric river event, dumps a lot of rain on that soil. That soil then turns into a mudslide, and then you have a lot of death and destruction. And that's pretty much what happened in the Santa Barbara County about 3 years ago. So you have these, one event leads to the other, leads to the other. But she said the answer to all of those problems is you have a really good workforce. You have really good communication among people. So it's, at the end of the day, you can do all these technological fixes, but the thing that saves lives and the things that gets us through hard times, whether it's COVID or earthquakes or it's climate change, heat waves, it's people looking after people. And so what are the things that we can do as a society in terms of our values, in terms of our policies, that promote people looking in after people and taking care of people as a core value? I don't think we're getting that message very clearly from the White House these days, but that's something that we should be thinking about here in LA. It's something that a lot of people are wondering about. How do we set up more neighborhood scale, resilience, whether it's mutual aid groups or it's, various resilience centers, to be determined.
Yeah.
But I love the questions, and I love the aspiration to come up with tangible solutions to this.
It's great. That's what you've been dedicating your life to. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking time today to talk to us about it too. Certainly conversation doesn't end there. Unfortunately our time does, but I really appreciate this. I think this is important for everybody to hear. And I think that, connecting the environment to what we're going through now and how this will transcend this time period is really important to hear. So thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Aaron. As I said, it's all in communication and you're doing it. So thank you.
Thanks.